Hi, everybody. Welcome. Nice to see you. I am very happy to be here and to be joined by Lisa DeNight, who suggested tonight's film, Scarlet Street. Lisa, how are you this evening?
I'm doing very well, Andrew. Thank you. How about yourself?
Oh, just fine, thank you. And a little more haunted than I was before I saw this movie, but I can't say I'm haunted because of the similarities to my personal experience, so that's good.
That's a step in the right direction.
Yes, I agree. We are looking forward to discussing Scarlet Street with all of you tonight. In case you are new to our little get-togethers here, please keep your audio on mute unless you have a comment or question to make, but then please still keep it muted, but raise your hand. Use the little raise hand function showing on the bottom of your screen right now to let me know that you have a question or comment to make. And then when I call on you, please unmute yourself and ask your question or make your comment. And then please remute yourself so Lisa and I can discuss the insightful question or wise comment that you have just made. And we would love for people to please also say hi in the chat through Zoom. You can chat with each other, you can say hi to the group, and if you're from outside the greater Philadelphia area, we'd really love to know where you're from. So please pop in the chat and say so. Drop us a line, as it were. And if you really want to tell us where you're from and have other thoughts on how you found Bryn Mawr Film Institute or how we're doing with things, it would be great if you would visit the Where in the World section of the Film Studies Online part of brynmarfilm.org and drop us a line there and let us know where you might be from and how you found us and how we're doing, as they say. And now with that, we can begin with Scarlet Street. Although I will say that I don't see, oh, there's one. I was going to say our usuals who are first, we're not first today. We've got some different folks at the top of the list, which is wonderful. We will start with Robert. Robert, what's going on?
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Oh,
Please
thanks.
go ahead.
I thought this was a wonderful selection from Fritz Lang. My first taste of Fritz Lang, and it just struck me that this was a film of all smoke and mirrors. That we have people pretending to be things that they are not, and we have the main character Chris doesn't even know two fundamental things about himself. He doesn't know that he's a good painter, and he doesn't know that he's in a bigamous marriage. And then we have Johnny he's recruiting his own girlfriend to sort of become a prostitute to get money from Chris. And then we have Johnny executed for a crime that he did not commit. So all of this coming together, it almost feels like this is could be a slapstick comedy in the way. And then in the end, it all ends in death. And Chris does not die, but he becomes sort of committed to an eternal damnation, which I thought was like hell. So anyway, what the question I have is, if this is the precursor to film noir or is film noir, I was struck by the moral message of this is that, you know, how the people are going to be punished for their sins in the end, and I'm just wondering, I didn't think that was consistent with the idea of film noir, which I thought was a more existentialist approach, where there's really no morals, there's no right and wrong. We're living in kind of a relativistic society. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for the question, Robert. And it's a really thoughtful one about how the sort of philosophical underpinnings of the genre. What Well, I don't want to jump in if you have something ready to go, Lisa.
You sound like you have something on the tip of your tongue, so
Okay.
go for it, and I'll roll off you.
So, film noir, I wouldn't say film noir's sort of philosophical hallmark is moral relativism nearly as much as it is fatalism. I think film noir has a pretty good sense of right and wrong. It may not be Hollywood's traditional sense of right and wrong, and it may not always be American society's idea of right and wrong. If you can think of one of the early film noirs, Maltese Falcon, Sam Spade does plenty of things as the protagonist. He does plenty of things like lie to the police and other things like that that are strictly speaking immoral, but he has a code and it's his own code. And we, over the course of the film, come to understand it and, in theory, at least respect it. In this movie, I think that you do see people do bad things, behave badly, and get punished. Maybe they don't get punished in the way we think they should, or in the way that most of the time society would choose to punish people who do those things, but they do get punished, and that would have been a necessity of the Hollywood production code at the time. And since film noir pretty much runs its cycle during the time in which the code is around and enforced to varying degrees, it's sort of hard to separate the extent to which the punishment of the characters is a function of the genre in and of itself or a function of the genre as it operates within Hollywood. But what I will say is I think that this, on a thematic, or philosophical level, does fit into film noir very well, because it is about human weakness. It is about, how people are sort of consigned to certain fates and they think they're taking tremendous steps to avoid them, but ultimately they're not really. And it, you know, it also shows us that punishment is waiting for all of us who give into temptation or do bad things. I mean,
That's
the Johnny is executed for killing the Joan Bennett character. Now, he didn't do that, but Lord knows we saw him do plenty of other things that would warrant at least a serious punishment, if not death. And he probably did other things that would warrant death if the film were about him. So I don't. So I think that all sort of fits. Lisa, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I had a couple of things. That was a great rundown of why this does fit very thematically within film noir. And Richard, I loved all of your comments. The idea that you found this sort of like a comedy is fantastic to me, because while this is such a deeply dark and pessimistic and depressing movie, it does have this deep well of black humor to it. And that really comes in for me towards the end, even more, especially because while on the surface, this does seem like a almost excessively moralistic ending where everyone gets their punishment and comeuppance in, the quote unquote eyes of society. It's it's pretty perverse when you think about Fritz Lang getting one over on the censors. It's not that Edward G. Robinson's Criss Cross is haunted by the guilt of what he did. He's haunted by sexual jealousy at the end. And you have Johnny's character going to the chair for something that he didn't actually do, no matter if he has this laundry list of bad deeds. And Fritz Lang is really kind of making a statement there about the justice of the penal system, of the justice system. And so while this film does fit within the confines of the production code, with the confines of the film noir genre, it is a very perverse version of that. And I feel like that underlines very strongly the Black humor that I know and love.
Yeah,
Can
I mean,
I ask one more a follow-up or not?
quickly.
Oh, okay. Lisa, why did you ask us, in terms of our introduction to Fritz Lang, why did you ask us to view this movie and not M?
Good question. Scarlet Street's my favorite Fritz Lang. I mean, I don't know if I have a better reason than that. It's just one of many American masterpieces that he made, but it's just my personal favorite. I think it's the highest peak of Fritz Lang's pet themes that recur throughout his German and American. I love it. That's why.
Thanks, Robert. Let's see. Liz, you have a question or comment? No. Okay. Joss, you have a question or comment?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I wanted a few observations and certainly love to hear your thoughts. I hadn't thought of this in terms of comedy, and I thought, Robert, that was a very clever observation. I mean, it is certainly structured somewhat like a farce, which brought to mind, and so that idea of comedy brought to mind Chris's wife, Adele. And she reminded me of several characters in several movies done with W.C. Fields and his excessively domineering wife in several of them. And it just really brought that to mind. So comments about that. A couple of other things. When I think of film noir, I guess I'm thinking, I've thought often about Maltese Falcon and other things with Bogart, anything to do with Raymond Chandler, and also Double Indemnity. And I kept thinking, where is the hard-boiled dialogue in this movie? And because it typically comes from the male characters like Sam Spade or like Walter, I forget his last name in Double Indemnity. And it wasn't coming from the men. I mean, even Johnny's dialogue wasn't really that clever, hard-boiled stuff. It was almost sort of pseudo-tough guy. But the women, Joan Bennett's character and her roommate Millie, they really had some great hard-boiled dialogue, which was in contrast to, certainly in contrast to Chris and everybody else in the movie. I would welcome any comments about Fritz Lang's visual style, because the only other Fritz Lang movies I've seen were Metropolis and M, but his visual style seems to me is very recognizable. I mean, he was using darkness even in Metropolis, in many scenes in Metropolis, as he did in this film. Anyway, those were some of the things that I noticed when watching this film. You've already commented on the sexuality and teasing the Hayes office limits. Any comments about any of the things I had to say? Thank you again for recommending this movie, Lisa.
Thanks, Joss. A couple of thoughts on some of the things you said. Regarding Lang's style, I think that the films you mentioned, and Robert mentioned M, you mentioned M and Metropolis, the creative freedom that Lang has, both as an individual because of his status as an artist, but also because he was working in a different film industry, the German film industry, while he makes his films in Germany, make them, a visual departure from his American films. That's not to say you can't see any threads that tie them together, and that's not to say there isn't any style in his American films. It's just saying that he's working with in a completely different industry with a completely different set of choices even open to him in Germany than in the US. That being said, in this movie, I saw, even for film noir, I saw a lot of darkness. I saw some shots that emphasize the powerlessness, the smallness of Crisscross. Think particularly of the shot toward the end when the boss calls him to the office and he's sort of down the flight of stairs and the camera's overhead and we see him sort of meekly come up the stairs and the camera just sort of is looking down on him like a disappointed parent. And it's really high. It's not a point of view shot from his boss. It's the camera's like in the ceiling to make him look extra small. And also I think of Lang, I think of geometric shapes and lots of sort of finding interesting deco lines, and you saw that as well and in other shots of staircases too. So there are those elements there. He just doesn't have the freedom and probably frankly the collaborators to do it up the way he did in Germany. I'm having trouble remembering some of the other things. I don't want the same thing to happen to you, Lisa, so please take it away.
Hard-boiled dialogue was one.
Oh, right. Okay.
So the
Go ahead,
hard-boiled
Lisa.
dialogue, I'm so glad you brought that up because one of my all-time favorite lines is in this film, and you have to know the context for it. When Kitty says, "Paint me, Chris," and she means her toenails. It connects. I know a number of you have been attending these discussions throughout all of this, and that line always gets stuck in my free association with the incredible line, "Match me, Sydney," from The Sweet Smell of Success. It's just so laden with perverse kinkiness. Like, it's just so subversive film noir, and I love that line. And you're right, it's in the mouths of the female characters that we get the hardest, best dialogue from this movie, although I think Dan Duryea would beg to differ in some cases. But that really plays into the overall gender subversion going on in this film. I mean, we could talk for hours about all of the different ways that male and female traits are exchanged, and composites of male female identity are created to really shocking extremes for the time. In fact, when I really think about what censors in local cities and states that just bans the film outright, we're thinking is less about violence maybe, and more even subconsciously about this really subversive gender interplay going on. So I love that you identified the hard-boiled dialogue coming from the mouths of the dames, and you also echoed the comments about this kind of appearing in some respect as a farce to you. And one thing that I when I was revisiting Scarlet Street for this discussion, one thing that I had sort of forgotten is that the film opens with this street organ grinding music and a monkey, and the monkey's doing a little tap dance or something for the boss's mistress. And Andrew was talking about all these sharp angles. Even the opening angle of Scarlet Street, you get from the gutter. Like it's just sort of like a street level view, but kind of a rat's eye view of what's going on. You just see people's legs walking by, and to have the opening being this kind of carnivalesque organ grinding music, it really does set you up for this farce of the worst of humanity in some respects.
I mean, something that Lang seems to do in his American noirs is he's not interested in subtlety or subtext. And I think this is why this movie, and frankly, if you've seen The Big Heat, why moments in that film seem almost you wondering if you should laugh. They're almost on the verge of farce. They're almost on the verge of taking the genre to 11. And it's because, to my mind, it's because he wants to get down to it, and he's not interested in hiding things, and he wants it to be as in your face as possible. And if you think about it, the whole movie is in your face, from the boss who is very comfortable letting all of his employees know that he's running around on his wife with some woman that he's keeping in a certain style. And I mean, that doesn't seem to me like something most bosses would flaunt, particularly not during the Great Depression, because remember, it's 1934 when the film starts. To the way that Dan Duryea and Joan Bennett are barely even trying to conceal their relationship from Edward G. Robinson at the start of the film. And so that's one of the reasons why I think the movie doesn't have as much hard-boiled dialogue as you might think. Well, one is it doesn't have, a Raymond Chandler or a Dashiell Hammett or a Billy Wilder writing it. But two, on some level, those things are about subtlety or subterfuge. And this, think about the back and forth between Fred MacMurray and Barbara Stanwyck about, how fast was I going, officer? Say I come off my bike and give you a ticket, whatever. Like, they're not talking about traffic rules, right? But that is a layer that this movie isn't interested in. The other thing I would say about the hard-boiled dialogue is to have a character credibly deliver a hard-boiled dialogue, they have to be two things. They have to be reasonably intelligent, and they have to be an alpha. And in this movie, Dan Duryea is not reasonably intelligent. The only person who's reasonably intelligent and an alpha is the Joan Bennett character. In Double Indemnity, it's both Fred MacMurray and Barbara Stanwyck. In Maltese Falcon, it's both Humphrey Bogart and Mary Astor. But you couldn't have the protagonist in this movie deliver hard-boiled dialogue, because anyone who can do that isn't going to be enough of a milquetoast to fulfill this character's whatever the opposite of potential is. And so I think that it exists in the film where it's appropriate, but it's not as appropriate in this movie, despite my confidence that it fits well within the genre. Liz, you have a question or comment? Okay. Let's see. Janis and or David, you have a comment.
I do, and it might be we, I'm not sure.
Hi.
We had trouble getting in today. The system didn't let me in at the beginning. So I have a couple observations and comments. One, which if it's too funny, I'm sorry. There were parts of this that I kept thinking of Jimmy Stewart, because I was in Harvey when I was in high school, and this thing kept bouncing between almost Harvey-like humor, and when it got dark, it really got dark, and I felt like it was a stone skipping across the water, and each time it went up in the air, it was this funny humor, and then it would hit the water and it would get dark, and then it would bounce up again, and of course at the end, when it hit the water, it went all the way down to the bottom. I got interested in the artwork. Janis and I were sort of kidding about the artwork there. And I found out that John Decker was a real artist. He was the one who did all that artwork. And he died a couple years after the play. And I didn't know, Lisa, whether you knew anything more about him. His art seems to be still, commanding decent money in auctions. And I found it interesting that they not only found an artist, but they found a real artist. Thank you. And you keep taking us to interesting places on these film trips. So thank you for that too.
Well, thank you. I don't know anything about the artist. That's not really my strong suit. I don't know if you have any information, Lisa.
Very, very little. I know that John Decker was sort of a man about town and a desired portraitist of the stars. There's an interesting portrait he did of W.C. Fields, and he painted the portraits of a lot of people. But I agree. I really like that this film got decently known artist to actually do the work, because it's always difficult when you're dealing in a film with, you know, an artist or a creator to actually see what they're creating and see what this final product that is worthy of attention is. Sometimes it doesn't really go so well, but this, I thought, captured that amateur that has something pretty well. It actually, the artwork kind of reminds me of like Henri Rousseau or something, like very primitivism, nativism sort of artwork that actually is bought and sold and appreciated. So I thought that the film nailed the artwork element of the plot. And I'm glad that you were so intrigued by it.
I should also say that Edward G. Robinson was known for being an art collector and a connoisseur of art. And I don't know how many of you saw the movie about Trumbo, about Dalton Trumbo, but in that movie, and I have no reason to doubt that it's at least spiritually, if not factually true, that Robinson was seen to have sold paintings to help cover some of the expenses of some of the blacklisted writers and other filmmakers. So he really had an eye for it, and he was quite good at it. So the irony of him being told he had no perspective is doubly amusing, because one, of course, they're talking about his painting, but really the character in life has none. But also, as it turns out, when it came to art, Robinson had quite a bit. So that was a little bit of an in-joke there, I think. Barbara and Richard, you have a question or comment?
Thanks, Andrew. It's Richard.
Hi.
Thanks for the selection. Three quick things so you can field whichever one you guys like. We were really impressed by the range of Edward G. Robinson's acting. You know, at the one end, there's like the tough little Caesar. And here, there was this really lonely, vulnerable guy. And it was heartbreaking to watch him. Second question is really to Lisa's introduction. I was looking for more of the strident sensuality, Lisa, that you mentioned in the introduction that got the film banned in several cities. Not because there weren't things there, but compared to other films, I was wondering if you might comment on whether similar things happen with other movies that, you know, seem to walk the same edge of sensuality. And Barbara and I are having an unresolved debate about whether Chris and Kitty ever actually have sex, or if he's trying to stay chaste until hopefully she'll marry him. The last thing is there isn't a healthy male-female relationship in this film. Adele and her first husband, Adele and Chris, Johnny and Kitty, Kitty and Chris, JJ and his girlfriend, presumably JJ and his wife. I wonder if you might want to comment on any or all of those things, but I'm especially interested in the imagery of this being so sensual that it was running, you know, the edge of the Hays Code, and even having passed the Hays thing, it was still getting banned in cities, in contrast, or maybe along with other movies. Thank you.
Thank you. Lisa, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I wish I remembered my introduction better, because I don't know if I made the direct correlation between the censorship and the sexuality, but I guarantee you that definitely played a part in it. What I was really thinking about when I talked about the censorship is the stabbing scene in particular is a real point of contention for the censors here. It initially was filmed with 7 individual stabbing motions, and the Hays Code had to like barter them down to 4 or something. Like they were actually going back and forth on the number of stab motions that were moral. I guess if you stab a woman 4 times, it's slightly more moral than 7. Very strange. But I think what really lies behind that is, and you asked whether or not Cross was chaste with Kitty. Well, of course he was. And this violent act with an ice pick is so blatantly phallic. Like it's straight out of Freud. It's blatantly phallic, and it is the culmination of the violence and sexuality that has been simmering within Chris once he realizes that the thing he thinks he owns, Kitty, is not his, and he feels empowered and entitled to take it. And that really is the moment in the film that he takes Kitty, is with this really perverse, sexualized killing. And there are so many other instances throughout the film where sexuality and violence are conflated. If you think of the scene where Adele comes in having seen Catherine March's paintings, and Chris is wearing the frilly apron and cutting liver, which is very moist looking, and then brandishes the knife as he walks toward her. And then as soon as she leaves, the knife just falls to the ground. It's such a phallic symbol. And then, of course, the dissolve from that scene of the knife on the ground, we get the almost exaggeratedly elongated figure of Johnny. Like the knife blends perfectly into Johnny. And you see this a couple other times where there's a close up on the painting that Chris painted with it, the snake and Kitty, and that snake, that kind of exaggerated, sexualized, male, violent presence is then dissolved into another shot of Johnny kind of waiting under the stairs for Chris to leave the apartment. So the sexuality is, and Andrew was saying that, you know, this is not a subtle movie, and those are not subtle dissolves, nor are they subtle symbols. But that's really where the perverse sexuality comes in my mind. And I'm certain that while it was probably not explicitly stated, that central stabbing scene where they were dithering back and forth about 4 versus 7 stabs, I'm sure that was an underlying current there.
Before I share my thoughts, I just want to say we had some people who had their hands up and the hands went away. We currently have nobody with hands up. So if you're one of those people who still has a question or comment, please raise your hand through Zoom again, and I will get to you as soon as I finish these remarks, which is, I think, the big issue with this film, and from a censorship point of view, is the same thing that would and does rank all Hollywood censors even today with a rating system, which is the combination of sex and violence. Putting those things together is an enormous no-no in the American film industry. And I'm not saying that's a bad rule of thumb, but that's the surest way to upset people or cause a reaction from censors of any kind. And this film does it in the ways Lisa has just identified, but it also does it in the way the whole relationship between Joan Bennett and Dan Duryea is a warped relationship that relies on physical pain, at the very least, as being part of their codependency, but really it would seem as part of their erotic charge with one another. And he is a pimp and she is his prostitute. And this movie does the least of any Hollywood movie from the 40s I can think of to hide that. And I mean, Edgar G. Robinson says, "You're an actor, right?" And she's like, "Sure." And later on, Dan Duryea says, "You always wanted to be an actress, right?" So she's not an actress. We know. And so I think it's the combination of those elements that makes the film's depiction of sexuality so problematic for the people it was problematic for at that time.
Can I add one more
Yeah,
thing?
sure,
Andrew?
sure.
I don't know if anyone has seen La Chienne, the Jean Renoir film that was the kind of initial adaptation of the French novel that was the inspiration for Scarlet Street. But just to kind of show a counter, Jean Renoir portrayed the kind of elder cashier, the Edward G. Robinson character, as actually having sex with the Kitty character in that film. So, and she was also very explicitly a prostitute in that film. So there is kind of a precedent for this to be a sexual relationship, but certainly that was not allowed in 1945. And so Fritz Lang had to go find some unsubtle ways to convey the same thoughts.
Judy, you have a question or comment?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Judy.
Okay, great. I love this movie. Thank you, Lisa, for selecting it. It's a wonderful film noir, but I feel that there's so much more going on in this movie that was sort of brilliant. This whole idea of the deceit and the artifice that runs as a theme throughout the entire movie, and especially pointed, I think, at the art world, the world of fine arts, the world of acting, all of it. I think it's brilliant. I mean, she's not an actress and she can't act, but she acts beautifully when she's repeating Chris's comments about the painting, and it's a beautiful recitation, and it convinces the art dealer that she's the artist. I mean, there's so much going on with the art world and the artifice of signing your name to a painting that you didn't paint. I thought it was just really, really brilliant.
Yeah, thanks, Judy. Yeah, I mean, I thought the whole, I appreciated in particular the kind of gender dynamic that was at play regarding the art, that they were so sure a man painted it based on the picture. The experts were so sure based on the pictures that they were shocked when it turned out to be a woman. But of course, the film spends all its time telling us how Edward G. Robinson isn't a real man anyway, and he wears that frilly apron. So I thought the whole notion of the identity of the artist, you're right, was part of the kind of lampooning of the contemporary art world. Lisa.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, because you're right. There is so much going on in this movie, and the kind of hierarchy of art commerce is, as Andrew was saying, kind of lampooned in this film. And I feel like Fritz Lang is sinking his teeth into that, especially because he in Hollywood felt himself an artist under attack by all the middlemen and producers, and everyone trying to drag his art down. But yeah, it's just such a fascinating hierarchy of the artists hawking their wares in the square, to the black market dealer, to this pompous art critic who we as the spectators are kind of laughing at, because of course his theories on the gender of the painter is wrong. So it's definitely taking a cynical view on everything, but also art and commerce. But at the same time, I will say that the way that the creation of these paintings is treated in the film is quite interesting, because it's treated with some level of warmth and authenticity. But I mean, nothing is untainted in this film, because Chris is expressing his emotions in this really beautiful and kind of creatively freeing way. But at the same time, you, the spectator, know that he is so blind. Like he has this visionary, artist expression of his inner emotions, but he is at the same time so blind to how he is perceived in the world and how he perceives others. He's remarkably self-involved, and so that there's so much interplay in that alone when you actually think of the art creation in the film.
The other thing I wonder about is that Joan Bennett and the film's producer Walter Wanger were married. They had a long marriage, and they were married during the time this film was made, as well as the film that the two of them and Robinson collaborated on before this, Woman in the Window. And now Lang worked with them again, so in some sense, you know, he must have been okay with the relationship. But I can't help but imagine that Lang took some pleasure in his depiction of Dan Duryea and Joan Bennett giving this actual artist the runaround, when he was probably envisioning that it was producer Walter Wanger and Joan Bennett giving him, Lang, the real artist, a runaround. So I think you might have had a little bit of personal identification, not with any of the sort of romance or murder angle, but with the frustration of an artist who is surrounded by people who don't really understand what he's trying to do. Let's see. Ken, you have a question or comment?
Yes, I found in the beginning of the movie, or the first half, I said, this is really coming across to me as a real nasty movie. Nobody's made to look that good. I felt like everybody was taking advantage of everybody else. And I kind of enjoyed when it got to a little bit of the comedy about how all of a sudden he became a famous artist without realizing it. And to me, that was, I don't know if we want to call it comic relief, but it was the comedic twist to it. And that's when I started enjoying the movie more. And I think from that point on. And the other twist, the Edward G. Robinson movies I've seen, and there haven't been that many, were, as you mentioned, Little Caesar, and wasn't he the card player from the Cincinnati Kid? And he's usually a tough guy. And it was really kind of unique seeing him as the henpecked husband who everybody takes advantage of. And yet, despite all this, in the end, he ended up becoming kind of violent, more so than in the movies where he's a tough guy, I think. And I thought that was an interesting twist. The other twist I thought was kind of strange is Dan Duryea, who's this dark figure who's taking advantage of people. And he wears this straw hat that makes it look like he's Harold Hill from The Music Man. I don't know if that was the style back then, but and he always wore light colored clothes. Just, I thought his acting was great, and he really depicted that. I thought it was kind of an interesting portrayal of him like that.
Well, thank you. Yes, I don't know. It is the 30s. I don't know if that has anything to do with his style, or maybe he was just going for a market niche, like he was the pimp in the straw hat, or the pimp with the light wardrobe, or whatever. There's the man in the gray flannel suit. There's the pimp in the tan linen suit. I don't know. But in terms of your other points, this is a really, really, dark film, a grim film. And if you look at a lot of films noir, they sometimes have, there's no good person in them. It's just lesser degrees of unsavoriness. And I think that I wouldn't call his art garnering recognition, I wouldn't call it funny so much. I would call it ironic, and I would call it a cruel irony that this man could have had all sorts of doors open to him and his life changed dramatically if he had just stuck with his art and had the nerve to kind of put it out there. And to me, it's ironic, but it's just another sort of, knife in his back, as it were. Lisa.
I'll touch on two things. The clothes, first and foremost. I was not alive in the 1930s, but I understand from reading that this costume that he was wearing is kind of a very flashy display of sexuality. Like, as Andrew was saying, kind of beaming to the world. Yes, I'm a pimp. Yes, I have sex with women. I think that the zoot suit and the pinstripes, like, he is very clearly peacocking around. And I love how the clothes are just so symbolic in this film. There's one critic who wrote about the introduction that we get to Kitty. She's in this see-through plastic raincoat. And I'll always remember this line. It's like she's a disposable good. And that is just so evocative, and I'm sure hitting the nail right on the head for what Lang and the costume designer was trying to get across with that first depiction. Just this kind of cellophane wrapper over a pastry treat from the bakery or something. And then, of course, because this film is all about appearances and deception, they think Chris is this rich guy because he's adorned in his finery, tucked, because he was out being feted. He has a very expensive watch. So the clothes are really key in this film. And I love also watching the clothing choices change gradually throughout the movie. Like Kitty is, kind of cheaper fabrics, very shiny, flashy fabrics when she meets Chris, but then kind of gradually as she's getting more and more money from him, the clothes are upgraded. They're more expensive fabrics, kind of nicer looking dresses. Johnny gets a car. So the clothing is just so fun to watch and kind of dissect in this film. It was the second point I was going to make. The nastiness, yes. This is a nasty film. I do agree. I love it in spite. But one thing that I think kind of separates the nastiness from cruelty, because and opinions may vary. I don't personally see this as a cruel film, like on the part of Fritz Lang being cruel to his kind of marionette puppets in the film, because I think Fritz Lang is making the point that everyone, spectators involved, is capable of being a criminal, being a horrible person, and therefore there's no moral condemnation really in this film, because there's no higher moral ground on which to judge these people. Again, opinions may vary, but I don't think that Fritz Lang is being cruel here. I think he's just being more deliberately exploratory in the worst of humanity. But I don't think Fritz Lang would even say he's on a higher moral ground than any of the characters in this film.
Lisamarie, you have a question or comment?
Thank you, Andrew and Lisa, for this film. Yeah, I felt deeply intrigued by this film. I found it fascinating how it was woven together. It was a web of tragedy in my mind. And it took a really long time as different characters were being introduced to unfold. I kept wondering, like, well, what's the point? What's going to happen? And I felt a lot of frustration with how the characters were treating each other. And I think Chris, for me, I felt like he was the main tragic figure, where he had given his whole life away. He never really did anything with his art, and he basically sold his soul to being married, no matter whether he loved the woman or not, just because he was lonely. And I felt like it was really interesting, and I was so shocked at the end when he was the one who murdered her. That whole scene just shocked me. I wasn't expecting it, because the film seemed to be kind of rolling along with all of these different dysfunctional scenarios happening. And and then I was just really shocked. I didn't feel like Chris did this out of any kind of sexual frustration. I think he did it out of jealousy. I think he did it because he gave everything away, and he did things that he normally wouldn't have done, like stealing from his boss, from the company, and from his wife, and taking money from places just to get the woman of his desires. And so I feel like it was a deep tragedy. Lisa mentioned something in the introduction about this being a Gothic, like a film noir versus a Gothic film. And I would like to know a little bit more about what that is.
Okay, thank you, Lisamarie. I don't recall you mentioning Gothic in this introduction.
That may have been for Gaslight, Lisamarie.
Yeah, I think that was Gaslight.
Oops.
That's okay. That's okay. But your other point I thought was very interesting, because, you know, you talked about this movie being a tragedy, and one of the things I shouldn't say always, one of the things I often find interesting in movies is, where does the movie start and where does it end? And by noticing that, we're getting a sense of what the real sort of purpose of the story is. And now this movie, because it's a Hollywood movie from the 40s, and because it's a film noir, we expect it to sort of begin and end with this man's, Edward G. Robinson's, relationship with Kitty, right? We expect it to be about Chris and Kitty, just like Maltese Falcon is about, you know, Bridget and Sam Spade, and Double Indemnity is about, you know, Barbara Stanwyck and Fred McMurray. But this isn't about that. It takes longer than it should in a movie like this, of this time, for him to meet her. And the movie goes on for a long time after she's dead. And that's because this story is really about the fall of Chris. And it is a tragedy. It really is about the tragedy of this man's life. Think about how it starts with him being honored in this way that, you know, most people just aren't honored, and having this esteem and this appreciation from all these people, and being given this, in 1934, being given this enormously valuable gift, even for a man of those means, of his boss's means. And then think about where it ends. And his relationship with Kitty is a large part of the journey, but it's not the whole journey. And that, to me, is a very interesting aspect of the movie. Lisa.
Do you have anything to say about the clock, the watch that he was given? Because that sense of time given to us at the very beginning of the movie, like you said, and him pulling the watch out at certain times, we were expecting him to sell the watch, but he never did. And I was wondering if that was tied into the sense of the timing of the whole film.
I think the watch is more there as the key thing that fools Kitty into thinking he's a man of significant means, and that he's a man of higher class than he actually is. That, and his, you know, his pride, or his refusal to acknowledge otherwise when they meet, I think, is what gets the whole ball rolling. Because if she knew sort of what he was from a net worth point of view and a career point of view at the beginning, then the whole thing never would have happened, I don't think. But I'm sorry, Lisa, go ahead.
Oh, the watch, I will say, as a symbol, kind of features very prominently in Fritz Lang's career overall. I can think of many movies of his that have watches, timepieces, just another symbol of the, and I mean, Andrew is correct. It is kind of visually an indication of wealth that is, you know, cluing Kitty into a possible mark. But I think it also functions as the symbol of this unmovable, unshakable force that marches on and kind of defers and destroys dreams along with it. So time is never on anyone's side in this film. So the watch is an interesting symbol. I'm glad you brought it up. But I loved your description of, and maybe it sounds like you were a little not bored, but kind of waiting, anticipatory to see what was coming, of the plot unfolding here. I love how this film kind of functions on a moment to moment basis, on these like little series of small intrigues that kind of build and build to larger intrigues. Like, so much of the plot is, who's coming through my door? Like, it's just so based on surprises and you're not knowing what's going to come next. And I really like that element of the plot. But I think even further, you have so much plot, you have so many narrative threads, so much going on in the film, so many different characters you're meeting, because it also furthers this pervasive theme throughout every aspect of the film, the mise en scène, the music, the editing, that Chris, who is ostensibly the central character, the central tragic character of the film, he is increasingly limited and boxed in and kind of shuttled to the side, even within what is ostensibly his own movie. I mean, there are plot networks, kind of narrative webs that take place with him not even knowing about them, whole characters that he may not be aware of. And I think that works so elegantly. I mean, on one hand, it may be read as a lot of plot and who knows where this is all going. But I think, viewed as a whole, the abundance of plot, a lot of which Chris is not even an active party in, or maybe doesn't even know about, functions to kind of further dig the themes deeper for us spectators. So I love that element of the film's construction. I was going to say something else, but I've lost that thread. So I'll hand it back to you, Andrew.
Okay. Janet, you have a question or comment?
Sure. Nothing really new to add. I watched Noir Alley TCM on Sunday mornings, not at midnight on Saturdays. So I'm glad to add this one to my list of movies seen. I've liked Lisamarie's referring to it as a web of tragedy and a series of dysfunctional scenarios, and also the reference to Dan Duryea, Johnny's clothing as being Harold Hill-like or a market niche, but I just never expected an Edward G. Robinson film to take me down the paths to the West Village into art and surrealism. And when those gentlemen come in and say these paintings are great, well, it just sort of underlines that it's great if people like Jansen say it is. I actually thought the paintings were really bad. And Jansen, by the way, is the last name of a person who's written a history of art that's used in Art History 101 college textbook. A lot of people have that. And then, but the last thing I'll say is that it was fun to see Joan Bennett, whom I knew from 1970s Dark Shadows movies and the series. And she actually was the token celebrity on a cruise I took, 15 years ago. And I did not know who she was. But I just rewatched House of Dark Shadows, and she was still beautiful. And she had, I'd say, the exact same vocal mannerisms and so on. So good choice. Oh, we can't end without mentioning Big Eyes, the Tim Burton film about the paintings by the woman played by Amy Adams. Okay, that's all.
Thank you, Janet. Thanks for sharing those comments.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Roseann and Lex, question or comment?
Yeah, it's Roseann.
Hi.
I have 3 comments, actually. One was on the whole idea of her being a prostitute. She didn't think of herself as a prostitute, I don't believe. I believe that she thought she was just really in love with this guy. And, she wasn't held to him in any other way. She could have, went out like her friend Millie kept saying and gotten a job. a real job. I didn't really feel like she played the prostitute role as we would view it today. He prostituted her without a doubt. I agree there. But I don't think she thought of herself as a prostitute. And prostitutes know they're prostitutes. That's one thing. The second thing is that we didn't, although Lisa just alluded to it, these subplots with all the various characters. So for me, Criss Cross was conned by Johnny, by the woman, what was her name? The main
Kitty.
character.
Kitty.
Right, Kitty. Conned by Kitty. Conned by, essentially, also conned by Adele's husband. And in the end, I want to make these observations. So he's conned by all these people, right? And Kitty is abused by Johnny, but it is Criss Cross who kills her. I mean, that's, that's the ultimate abuse, right? And then Criss Cross double crosses Adele's first husband because he surely doesn't want to keep Adele as his wife. He is thrilled to give her back.
Yeah.
So those subplots made me think that, he'd had enough. It wasn't a sexual killing so much as it was, he'd had enough. Everybody was conning him. He'd had enough. It was the end. He was at the end of his rope. That was it. Anyway, those are my comments.
Okay. Well, thank you, Roseann. I will say that I think the movie does make it clear, as much as a Hollywood movie from 1945 can, that she is a prostitute. She is referred to as a working girl. She meets him at 2 a.m. and she says she's on her way back from work. And I don't think she's, working in a munitions factory. And I think that the film only shows us her time with Criss, but I don't think there's any reason we should think she's not also doing other work at different times. But it's really a secondary point, because she is doing, she is, working Criss. And I think that there is a connection between his, between arousal and his and impotence he has, if not in the biological sense, then in the sort of, personality sense, that all sort of comes to a head when he kills her. I think that I agree with Lisa that there is definitely an element running through that act that is linked to the sexuality that he has been, ignoring or denying or keeping tamped down all this time. And then when he can no longer ignore the fool that he's been played for, all those emotions he's been bottling up erupt, and that's not all of them. The sexuality isn't all of them, but I think it's part of it.
I agree that the sexuality is part of it, but I don't think it's the end all and the be all. And the other thing about the prostitute is, not once, I can't help but hold my view on this, and
Okay.
It makes no difference whether you agree with it or not, but throughout the whole movie, you don't see her. You don't see Kitty at all with any other men except Johnny and Criss Cross. And that's why I think that he was prostituting her, but that she herself didn't think of herself as a prostitute. But the point you just made right now, telling me that she considered herself a working girl, you're right, she wasn't coming from work in a munitions factory. You're right. I see your point too.
Well,
It's-
Roseann, you made a really interesting comment about how she doesn't see herself as a prostitute. And I think you are dead on about that. I think the film is just as concerned with Kitty's delusions as it is with Chris's delusions. I think that, we've talked about Chris being a tragic character. I think Kitty is also, I mean, she's horrible, but I think she's also a tragic character. And I think that the film even somewhat views her as such. I mean, she initially didn't want to take money from Chris. She's just so blindly obsessed with Johnny, who really doesn't care about her at all, that she is willing to go along with his plans. And really the final crisis where Chris ends up stabbing her is precipitated because she hates any indication that Chris is going to kill Johnny or Chris is going to butt up against Johnny. Like that's sort of what precipitated that, and her anger over being left by Johnny so horribly. So I think that the Kitty is also a secondary tragic figure in this film. But I also think that she is delusional. I think that she probably doesn't think of herself explicitly as a prostitute, but is very aware of what she's doing at the same time. That there are lines about where Johnny says to her, like, "Oh, call up so-and-so and get a quick $50. Like there are so many little inferences that she is being prostituted, but is a willing participant in that. But I think you're definitely onto something when you say that she doesn't think she's a prostitute. She is a delusional person, just as Chris is.
Thank you very much, Roseann, for your comments. Lillian, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, somebody mentioned him, but I was thinking about the sudden appearance of the husband, Adele's husband, in this movie, which I thought was a bit of a comic touch. Here's this guy who'd rather just disappear and live life as a bum rather than being married to Adele anymore. What I got out of this. And then the fact that, this gives Chris and makes him happy in a way, because he knows now he's not married to Adele because she's a bigamist. Except that he gets caught in another trap with this husband because he gets blackmailed by him.
Yeah, no, I think you're onto something there. I think that if I or anyone else was willing to completely dismiss any comic sensibility in this movie, then I will speak for myself. Then I clearly forgot about the painting that lords over that living room with the actual metal on it. And I forgot about, as you say, this man who would rather live as a bum with an unnecessary cosmetic eye patch than be married to Adele. I also think, though, that his return does something else, I think, even more important for the movie. And to me, that is it subverts our expectations, right? If my expectation, and I think the film, I don't think it's just me, I think the film wants us to think, knowing that we've had a few years of, and who knows how many noirs by this point, wants us to think that Edward G. Robinson is going to kill Adele so he can be free to marry Kitty. But that course of action gets taken off the table, and admittedly in a rather humorous way. But that expectation that that's where the film was going is subverted, and for that to happen, I mean, the genre, Hollywood worked in genres so much during this time because there was something about the familiarity of them that worked for them from an industrial point of view, but worked for audiences as well in terms of narrative and character satisfaction. And this is definitely a wrench in the works there. And I found that so interesting and a very worthwhile reason to bring in a character who might seem random or extraneous.
I also think that it's a way for the film to present this image, this appearance of like a high paragon of noble patriarchy this, you know, ennobled man who died trying to save this grand hero, and then pull that rug out from under. Someone earlier in the chat said that there's no healthy relationship. There's no good male role models in this either. Like Chris has Johnny, a kind of paragon of disgusting male abusive sexuality, and then this, you know, paragon of male heroism, that both of which are just as phony as the other.
Janice, did you have a question?
Yeah, hi, thanks, Andrew. I just wanted to say that I was thinking about the very beginning of the movie when they were guys were all at the party and they were toasting Chris, and, you know, he gets his watch, and then JJ, you know, says, oh, I've got to leave soon. And, you know, then he leaves and everybody looks out the window and they see JJ getting into the car with this beautiful, stunning blonde. And even though it wasn't a black and white movie, you could just see how gorgeous she was. And the guys, like, you know, their eyes lit up. And I think that realization by this innocent, who Chris was at that point, you know, someone who was willing to live an unhappy marriage, do his job, kind of just go along with, you know, the dailies, you know, of his life, whatever his, you know, was there for him, all of a sudden thought, wow, my boss, who I've looked up to and admired, can have a woman on the side. So, you know, that was just the setup for, you know, as he's leaving the party and he encounters, what's her name? I forgot already.
Kitty.
Kitty. So, you know, that was just, you know, his downfall, realizing that you didn't have to be a good person your whole life and have people look up to you, you know, the way he did with his boss. And I thought his relationship with his boss was very interesting. You know, how the boss did not call the cops on him, you know, when he realized, you know, what he had done, or sent the cops away, I should say. So anyway, thank you, Andrew. Great. And Lisa, terrific.
Thank you. I actually, I wasn't sure how to read the fact that Edward G. Robin, that Chris and his friend left the party when everyone else was ogling the boss's mistress. The two of them left, and I sort of took that to mean that they weren't interested in that lifestyle. But I suppose it's just as possible that his eyes were opened and it sort of got his mind kind of, you know, rolling on that sort of thing. But my first take was that he actually was less interested in that sort of thing than all the other men. And the reason he helps Kitty is some sense of, you know, civic duty. I think he's too far away to have any lust in his heart for her at that point, but I may be wrong about that. Lisa.
Yeah, I still kind of toy with that opening too. I think it's really interesting, and it can be read in a variety of ways. You know, it kind of posits again that Chris has no positive kind of sexuality in his life in any form. You know, this upstanding boss of his is, you know, illicitly stepping out with, you know, a woman who isn't his wife. And so I'm not sure if I read leaving the party as kind of a you know, responsible, upstanding gentleman's response, or if he just doesn't really know how to, like, he's so arrested in development and in trying to, you know, explore sexuality that he doesn't even know how to grapple with that exchange that he's seen. Like the arrested nature of Chris is just such a fascinating thing to explore in the film. I think of, you know, how he's painting in the bathroom and Adele comes in and there's just this like constant shame about bodies and functions and sexuality. It's constantly kind of shame and repression, illicitness. There's no positive thing for him to kind of glom onto to maybe grow and explore something that resembles healthy behavior.
That's a really interesting point, Lisa, and it should have occurred to me, but it didn't. That another perfectly plausible reaction is not, you know, a sense of superiority, but a sense of a complete, you know, lack of interest. That he really doesn't understand the way my 5-year-old wouldn't understand what the big deal is and what everybody's looking at, and you know, and so. And I think that as you indicated, there are other things to suggest that not that he's, you know, not that he's not masculine in the conventional sense because he's feminine or feminized, but because he's turned into, you know, he's infantilized. He's turned into a child, or at least he's at this point in terms of his sexuality that hasn't matured the way other things have. That's very interesting. I think that we are going to leave it there. We've gone a good bit over. I know that Robert and Ken have their hands up, but they can. I would encourage them to email me their comments or questions, and I can share them with Lisa if you like. But since we've gone on, I think we're gonna cut things here for now. We do have some of our remote classroom seminars coming up. Paul Wright is doing a very interesting take on The Office. I don't know how many of you remember those. I barely remember what it's like to go to an office. But this sitcom was very influential and very insightful in many ways. And that's why Paul Wright is offering a class on it on Tuesday, the 24th. And then we have yet another installment of our short attention span cinema, where a film critic and instructor Gary M. Kramer looks at a series of recent short films. All of these focus on films about family relationships. So we encourage you to join us for those. I would also very much like to thank Lisa for joining us tonight, and
My pleasure.
So generously giving of her time and insight as she has been doing over these 8 months. It's really, really appreciated. I would encourage you to, if this is the first time you're joining us, go to the Film Studies Online library. You can see a bunch of Lisa's and the other instructors' past introductions and our past discussions for the 30-odd films we have done this for since March. There are other wonderful film-related ways to learn and have fun, including puzzles, mini lessons on different film topics, and a host of other things. So please visit brynmarfilm.org. Check out the new movies we have available in Theater 5 and all the education and enrichment opportunities in film studies online. And if you like what we're doing and you have the means, we would ask you to please consider making a donation to Bryn Mawr Film Institute. We are offering this program and many others free of charge to help keep everyone engaged and entertained and educated during this time. We are all spending so much time apart, and it's tough for the Institute to make a go of it until we are able to welcome you all back in and start selling more tickets to movies in person. And I know we all want that to happen. Because that is the best way to see movies and to talk about them in person in a theater. But until that can happen, please consider making a donation. We would appreciate it. And we've benefited from so much support already. But if you have the ability to give for the first time or even to give again, we would really appreciate it. Thank you very much, everyone. If you want to know what's coming up a week from tonight, I hope you get our regular emails. You can sign up for our emails at brynmarfilm.org. Every Thursday, you'll get an email letting you know what Monday's film will be, and it has a link to the instructor's introduction. So I will see you Monday, and Lisa will be with us again down the line. Thank you as always, Lisa.
My pleasure. Thank you, everyone. I always gain so much more insight and appreciation of my favorite films after I talk about them with you all.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.